In France, there will be another duel between the liberal President Emmanuel Macron and the right-wing Marine Le Pen for the highest office. As the broadcasters France 2 and TF1 reported on Sunday evening after the polls had closed, the incumbent head of state and his competitor from the Rassemblement National will face each other in the runoff election on April 24th. Macron performed unexpectedly well. The Interior Ministry in Paris published the results after counting 92% of the votes of all registered voters. Accordingly, Macron won 27.4% and Le Pen 24.3%. Left-wing politician Jean-Luc Mélenchon came third with 21.3% of the vote. I saw later results, they changed a little bit, but not much. Even if many French were dissatisfied with Macron's first term and he did not inspire enthusiasm in the election campaign, he benefited from the weakness of other candidates. He also benefited from popular desire for stability and a moderate policy as a result of the war in Ukraine. He also has clear successes on the labor market and a robust takeoff for the French economy after the corona crisis. The populist Le Pen, on the other hand, tried to score with more moderate tones than before and at the same time presented herself as an advocate for those who are suffering from inflation and rising prices for electricity, fuel and food. Unlike Macron, she has been personally on site in numerous marketplaces and election campaign halls for months. The other candidates played a much smaller role in the election campaign. Macron and Le Pen will now face off on April 24th. That's a repeat of the 2017 runoff duel in which Le Pen ultimately lost to Macron. Polls predicted a much tighter outcome for this time, and again the candidate who finished second in the first round of the runoff in the French presidential election. What is at stake on April 24th is not a choice of circumstances, but a choice for society, a choice for civilization, Le Pen said on Sunday night. Two opposing visions for the future prevailed. Macron gave his acceptance speech almost 2 hours after the first forecasts. Your trust honors me, obliges me, and binds me, the president said in Paris in front of crowds of cheering supporters. You can all count on me to implement this progress and opening up project. But Macron also conceded, when the right-wing extremists in all their forms have so much support in the country, one cannot say that things are going well. And Macron warned before the runoff against Le Pen, let's not make a mistake, nothing has been decided. And I just say Brexit. According to a survey by the renowned Ipsos Sopra Steria Institute late Sunday evening, Macron could emerge victorious from the runoff with 54% of the votes. A victory for Le Pen would come as a shock to Germany and Europe with momentous consequences. Le Pen questions the close cooperation with Berlin that has been going on for decades and is more striving for cooperation with other Eurosceptics such as Budapest or Warsaw. In the European Union, France could change from being a driver to a brakeman under her in a very different way than under the pro-European Macron. In the current escalating crisis between the West and Russia, Europe and the US, along with Le Pen, fear that the solid pro-Ukraine front would crumble. While Macron is tirelessly struggling with Kremlin boss Vladimir Putin to find a solution, Le Pen has already made advances to him again. After the war ends, Russia could become a partner again, said the nationalist known as a Putin friend. Although polls predicted a much tighter outcome this time, Le Pen would need to mobilize significantly against Macron to win. She can count on supporters of Zemmour, who has already called for her election, and votes from some right-wing conservatives, but hardly any from the center-left camp. Here it would help her above all if leftists, frustrated by Macron, simply stayed away from the election and thus drove up their percentages. Le Pen, who is running for the third time, tried, as I said, to be more moderate during the election campaign. The longtime politician who inherited her father's leadership of the Rassemblement National, the former Front National, is nevertheless committed to restricting immigration and social benefits for foreigners. Macron was barely visible during the election campaign. Macron, who relied on economic progress during the election campaign, managed to get into the Élysée Palace in 2017 with his movement La République en Marche. Before becoming president, he worked as an investment banker, advised the socialist President François Hollande, and was Minister of Economy from 2014 to 2016 under him. The French head of state has far-reaching powers and holds office for 5 years. Around 48.7 million French people were registered to vote. According to an estimate by the renowned polling institute Ipsos, as I said, shortly after the polling stations closed, turnout was 74%, and so it was lower. After their clear defeat in the first round of French presidential election, several of the 10 failed candidates for the runoff on April 24th immediately called for votes for Emmanuel Macron. The common goal of the different candidates is the same: to prevent right-wing populist Marine Le Pen from presiding. Only one candidate campaigned for Le Pen. Socialist candidate Anne Hidalgo, mayor of Paris, wrote to her supporters on Sunday evening, "Because it is my lifelong commitment to the Republic and lest France fall into the hatred of all against all, I urge you to do so on April 24th to vote against far-right Marine Le Pen by using the ballot for Emmanuel Macron." Hidalgo emphasized that this is a decision of responsibility that does not affect her left-wing beliefs. "I know how disappointed you are tonight. Together we will take the objective stock, but you know we, like me, will never give up." Hidalgo promised to remain committed to France. As expected, Hidalgo only got around 2% of the votes in the first round, a historic defeat for the party. It wasn't even 2%. The conservative candidate Valérie Pécresse also failed with a bang. According to projections, the Républicains party only managed around 5%. Barely. After the first evaluations, they warned that if the right-wing candidate Marine Le Pen came to power in the runoff, there would be disastrous consequences for the country and for future generations. France would then be wiped off the European and international stage, according to Pécresse. Marine Le Pen's project would lead the country into discord, into powerlessness, into bankruptcy. The result is a personal and collective disappointment. I take personal responsibility for this defeat, Pécresse said. Well, they had to fight on two fronts. On the one hand, in President Macron's electoral camp, and on the other hand, on the extreme right. Voters would have chosen a useful vote for a candidate with a chance of success. The left-wing candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, also expressly spoke out in front of his supporters against the election of Le Pen after his departure. "You shouldn't give a single vote to Madame Le Pen," he said on Sunday evening. "I know your anger," he said. "Don't risk letting yourself make irreversible mistakes." Mélenchon, who finished third with a good 20% but missed out on a runoff, also called for people to continue. "As long as life goes on, so does the struggle," he said. The Green candidate Yannick Jadot also called for support for Macron. "This should prevent the far-right Marine Le Pen," said Jadot on Sunday evening. "No one should downplay the fundamental threat that the far-right poses to democracy, civil peace, ecology, and the values of the Republic." At the same time, Jadot warned Macron, "Our vote does not count as support for his responsibility for the disruption of the country through climate policy inaction, social failure, conformity, and democratic disregard." The right-wing extremist candidate Eric Zemmour, on the other hand, as I said, called for the runoff election for Le Pen, initially as the only failed presidential candidate. "You are facing a man who let 2 million immigrants into the country and never talked about internal security and immigration during the election campaign," said Zemmour on Sunday evening, referring to President Macron and with the crap we were expecting. He appealed to his supporters to vote for Marine Le Pen. What a surprise. In light of his election results, Zemmour acknowledged that he made mistakes. According to extrapolations, the surprise candidate who had temporarily overtaken Le Pen in the polls only achieved 7% of the votes. However, He announced that he would continue to be politically active. I take this as a threat. "We are the only ones defending our civilization and culture," said Zemmour, who had garnered numerous prominent Le Pen supporters. Among them is Le Pen's niece, Marion Maréchal, who may already be preparing for a 2027 presidential bid. Macron and Le Pen will face off, as I repeatedly said, on April 24th. And polls predicted a much tighter outcome for this time. And again, the candidate who finished second in the first round won the runoff in the French presidential election. And so there is a clear and present danger here for Macron. And if people stay at home, that's why I mentioned Brexit earlier, they might wake up with a President Le Pen. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.